And welcome back, everybody. Today's tutorial is the Fr0zone V3. In our last video, we covered the Fr0zone V2. So we have a 7-part Pickle Farm series. This is video 6. If there are any Pickle Farms that aren't included in this series that you would like us to build, let us know in the comments. We'd be happy to take a look at it, and we'd be happy to build it out for you. If you ever have general questions about how to build a Pickle Farm, or if you've built a Pickle Farm and something isn't quite working, we have a Discord. The link will be in the description. We'd be happy to help you. We will also have schematics for this Pickle Farm, as well as all of the other Pickle Farms that we have created on this channel. So come be a part of our community. Let's get started. Alright, let's get to building. We are going to be building the 12 module version, which will include 4 farms at the first layer, and we will stack the layers 3 high. So if you're following this tutorial, you will need a 19 by 19 space to begin. Once you have your space marked out, you're going to go to any corner to start off. You're going to count over 4 blocks from the corner, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and place your first piston. You're going to do a row of 5 pistons, so 2, 3, 4, and 5. You will then skip a block and place 5 more pistons, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that is the outside wall of your first farm. You're going to count 7 blocks in between the pistons for your shifting floor. So let's do that now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now these blocks need to be in between the pistons. So on the 8th block, you're going to place down your piston and do the same thing, counting from right to left. 5 pistons, skip a block, 5 more pistons. So your farm should look like this. Hop down, and on the opposite side of your border where you place your first row, we're going to place a row of pistons, but we're going to elevate it up 1, and we're going to place it on top of our pistons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Skip a block, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're going to come to the back of the farm, and conveniently, if you've laid it out in this 19 by 19 grid, we are going to count 4 over from the corner, but we do need to build up 1 block to make sure that our pistons are in line with each other. And you're going to count over 5 from there. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Make sure that you have a row of pistons opposite of each row. So Colin will go ahead and place the other 5 pistons to elevate that up. And again, easiest to place a block down to just get those on the same level. Now that we have our pistons, we are going to hop back down, and we're going to add some solid blocks on top of our pistons. Now, the pistons that are slightly below, so not the ones that are elevated, we do need to grab a redstone component that can, nope, I don't want jukeboxes, I want note blocks, that can provide a block update to our pistons, and this will make more sense as we build the farm up, but we do need some kind of redstone component to provide a block update because we are using quasi connectivity. So if you are on Bedrock, this build as it is will not work. There are some modifications we can make to make it work in your Bedrock world, but this is primarily designed for DonutSMP. So once you have placed your redstone block, again, this doesn't need to be a note block, it just needs to provide a block update, so copper bulbs, anything that can provide a block update on the bottom row of pistons. Grab your solid blocks and elevate it up 1, and make sure that we have a solid block covering each piston, and we're going to do that on both of these bottom rows. So solid block above each piston, and they do need to be solid blocks or the redstone signal will not transmit through. So once we have our solid blocks on our bottom row, the rest of it is elevated up where we need it. So we're just going to finish off the top of each piston with solid blocks. Alright, now that you have a solid block on your rows of pistons, we are going to need a building block that extends above that. So I'm going to switch to my building block of choice. This can be any building block. I will be using glass for the majority of the build, so we can see inside the farm. However, this can be any block of choice, but you're going to build out one block from your solid blocks, and you're going to build up one. And you're going to do this on each of the corners of your farm. So just place them on the edge, building up one block. You are going to grab your observers. Now it is easier to place these before we start doing the coral and water because I don't like being pushed around by water when building. So hop down, and if you just look up at the block we just placed, it is going to line up your observer perfectly, looking up into the sky or the top of your base, and place a row of observers along each of your solid blocks. And you're going to do this on every solid block that we placed above our pistons. Okay, now we've got our structure starting to take shape. You don't have to build it in this exact order, and if you are only building one farm to test it out in your base, anything that we do on the elevated farm can be done by itself, excluding the side or including the side, but we are showing you how to join the 3706 V3 in a way that will save the most space and give you the steps that makes it the quickest and easiest to build. So now we are going to need some leaf blocks, and we like to build with cherry leaves, but any leaf will work. On the farm that is on the ground, we are going to count out 4 blocks from the middle piston. Now conveniently, we already know which piston the middle piston is because we have a redstone component block on top of it. So we're going to count out 4 blocks, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We are going to break out that block in the ground and replace it with a leaf. And we're going to do that on both sides. Now on the elevated side of the farm, we're going to do the same thing, except this time we are not going to break out the block. We're going to count out 4, and we're going to place the leaf on top. This is going to be where we place our first coral block, so grab your water bucket and waterlog each of the leaves. Now, if you have not watched video 1 of our Pickle Farm tutorial series, we do explain in detail how to keep coral alive and why you need to waterlog certain blocks. That being said, we will give you all of the applicable steps in this tutorial to make sure that when you place your coral down, it is not going to die on you. So let's jump down and switch over to our coral. Our coral is going to start off on our leaves, so place a single block on each leaf. And then from here we need to grab our water bucket once again. So I am going to place down the top block and Colin is going to place down the water. You can do this quickly, so it's easier to have your water bucket right next to your building blocks, which in this case would be coral. Place your coral on top of the block, and then have your friend or switch to your water bucket quickly and place flowing water on top of the second coral block. And you're going to do this for all 4 farms. Now, when we build these in survival, the way we get around is by scaffolding. You only need a couple pieces of scaffold, so if you have access to scaffolding, it is really easy to build this really quickly. But once we have our water flowing, you don't need it as much because you can swim up the water for most of the next steps. But grabbing some scaffolding will help you in the long run. Once you have your pillar of coral that is 2 blocks high, we're going to start at the solid face of the coral block, and we're just going to build a little square all the way around. And as you build, the water will then flow over the top of your coral, and that will keep it nice and hydrated. And you're going to do this on all 4 farms, starting on the solid face and building a square all the way around. Now, for the elevated farms, it's not as big of a concern to place it on the solid face, because that's the only place you can put the coral. But on the farm that is not elevated, I would advise against placing it on the corner first and then working your way around. The water may not flow correctly and kill your coral, and I don't want your hard-earned coral dying on you. Now that we have our square built around our column, we're going to do the optimal pattern for our pickle farm, which is adding a block in the middle of each of the sides of our square. And this will be the starting position for your coral when we first turn the farm on. Now, if you don't know what a starting position is, the farm is broken into 2 parts. We have side A and side B. If you've, again, not watched our Pickle Farm series, now's a good time to pause and watch the first video that explains this in detail. But when the farm turns on, it starts in one position and it will shift the coral into a second position, which we will call position B. So let's establish that now. The farm that has the lowest side, so the side that we started off with, is going to be position B. The center wall will be position A. On the elevated farm, the side closest to the lower farm is going to be position A, and will be position B, and the side furthest away will be position A. So these are going to be built exactly the same. For our farm that is not elevated, we're going to add a coral block in the corner, and we're going to extend this out 1 block on the edge of each of our coral blocks. And you notice that I have swapped colors as a visual reference. This pattern will only apply when the farm is in position B. Currently, the blue coral are the spawnable locations for pickles, and as the floor shifts to position B, the red coral becomes spawnable for pickles, and the furthermost blue coral blocks will then not be a spawnable location. So the floor will shift back and forth, and this pattern will provide a spawnable location in all directions of your source pickle so that you get the highest return rates. Grab your building block of choice, and in the corners of our shifting floor, we are going to just add building blocks. Again, I'll be using glass. Add building blocks to all of your corners until you have a solid surface for the floor to shift back and forth on. You're going to do this for all 4 farms, adding building blocks in your corners so that when the pistons push, our pattern that we place down on our coral is not affected. All right, we have our 4 farms started. As you can see, the water is going everywhere. So this next step can be done before you place the water and the coral down. However, we are going to need to make a decision on where we want the pickles to exit. So the first thing that I want you to note is you need to identify the A side and the B side prior to deciding where your walls go. The A side is the side, again, that the coral is touching the wall. The B side is the side with the gap. So if you're following along with this tutorial, the gap is definitely needed or your farm will break. We are going to go to the A side of our farm, and I'm going to place a block right in the corner above our shifting floor off of the block that we created earlier. for our observers, and I'm going to build it all the way until we get too shy of the end, and this will be where our pickles will exit. I'm going to build up one more layer, and in the gap, as you can see, we're going to add fence gates, and you're going to add fence gates from now on. Whenever we build anything on this wall, if there's a fence gate, you're going to make sure that you always have a fence gate on top. On top. All the way up. Never place a solid block on top of this fence gate, because this is the small gap between our shifting floor and the fence gate that our pickles will exit the farm. Alright, now that we have our first exit for our pickles, we're going to go into our farm, and we're going to do the same thing on the inside of the farm, except we are going to go opposite of where we placed our exit. And I'm going to do that by starting a block in between the two solid blocks. I'm going to build out one, because this first row, where the coral is not spawnable, this first row is going to be covered in glass and a leaf, which we will get to in a moment. And this is going to be the space where my pickles will exit. So on the opposite side, starting in between our solid blocks, we're going to build all the way until we have a gap that is 2 blocks away from our observers and 1 block away from this furthermost coral. So this is where your exits are going to be. The first one will be even with our spawnable coral, and 1 block in, so the last spawnable coral on each side is the best way to look at that. On the furthermost wall, we are going to mirror what we did on the other outside wall. So I'm going to place my blocks here, and I'm going to build out until I get to that 1 block gap to place fence gates. And you'll see that the farm is aligned, and I'm going to finish up this middle one. That way everything is nice and tidy. So this is the structure of your farm, and the fence gates will be where your pickles exit. And if you're building the farm side by side, they are going to share the same exit, so the walls need to be mirror images of one another. Now that we have our walls in place, I am going to build up the walls on the inside of the farm. As I just noted, we will be covering this first row. We cannot cover this first row with anything other than a waterlogged block. So a full block, which is a leaf, which we have used in many of our farms, we're going to place on top and waterlog it. Now, once you have that placed and waterlogged, we are going to finish up solid blocks all the way along the top, even with our observers. And we're going to do this on both farms. Making sure that you do remember to waterlog that leaf, or your coral will die. Now, I'm just going to hop down here for a second to show you that currently we have water flowing underneath the coral. So on this first layer, if your water is flowing underneath it, your coral will not die by simply placing a leaf. You do have some time to waterlog it, but if that water is not flowing, you do need to waterlog it rather quickly to prevent that from happening. Now on the opposite side, the B side, we are going to place blocks up against the wall in the same pattern as side A, skipping the coral block and putting a waterlogged leaf, and finishing it up on top. Now this is the side that the floor will shift to, so if you don't add a waterlogged leaf in this location, when the floor shifts over, your coral will die on you. So make sure that you have a waterlogged leaf where the floor shifts under the wall that we just built. And that is the inside of your farm complete. Let's hop down to the lower level, and let's just go ahead and build up the wall first. So I'm going to place my 2 blocks all along the side A position, and Colin will follow me with leaves and waterlog it. We will build it up one more block, but note that on the lower farm, we are not building up even with the observer. We are just building up 2 blocks above our shifting floor. So you'll see that on both farms we have the same pattern. The only difference is the elevated farm will be even with the observer. The lower farm will be even with the solid block. On this side of the farm, you notice that we do have a gap, and I'm not a fan of temporary blocks, so whenever I can, I avoid them. So on this side, Colin will go ahead and place the leaves on that note block and waterlog them for me first, and then I will build out from there, making sure that my top row is 1 block below our observer, even with our solid blocks. Now the reason you might want to put the inside walls first, if you are trying to conserve materials, you can build off of this block like this. And to show you that it doesn't matter which side you go from, the inside exit for our pickle farm, for our elevated farm, is going to be side A. I'm going to switch that on the lower farm, so the exit on the outside wall will be side A. So I'm going to cover this all the way up, and Colin will place the fence gates in the corner. So our exit for our elevated farm will be side B for the outside wall, and for side A it will be on the outside wall right here. So you can choose which side you want your exit. Really, it doesn't matter if you're building multiple farms, because you will need water streams pretty much all the way along. Well, goodness, all the way along. So you will have a exit in both locations. So this is entirely up to you. Maybe if you want it to look more symmetrical. The point is, it doesn't matter which side you choose initially. Just make sure that your exits are always opposite of each other. And when you have farms joining each other, they do need to match, mirrored. So that is the inside of both farms complete. Let's move on to the water manipulation so the pickles know how to get out of the farm. Alright, before we demonstrate in the farm, we have this little area mocked up for you so we can show you the easiest way to do the water. Now, this only requires 2 buckets, so if you've watched other tutorials that tell you to grab multiple buckets, we're going to show you the easiest possible way to do your water. You're going to place your water in the corner in these 2 locations. So stand in your corner and place a water bucket in each of the corner blocks, and if you start on the side with your building blocks, you'll know that it is always on the building block side. Once you place these 2 buckets of water, your buckets are now empty, so you're going to look down in the corner that you are in, and you're going to fill them back up, because you've created an infinite water source in the corner. You're going to move to your next corner. You're going to place it now on the 2 coral blocks. In our example, they are different colors, but place it on the 2 coral blocks, and then fill your buckets up in the corner. And you're going to do this on all 4 corners, adding water right next to the block you're standing on until you get to the final corner where you have converted the entire space into an infinite water source that you can pull from. Now, only pull preferably from on top of a building block. Don't pull on top of coral, because if you pull it too quickly on top of coral, you could kill your coral. Once you have your infinite water source, we will move to the water manipulation inside the real farm. So the optimal way to do it, again, place your 2 water buckets in the corner. Once you place your 2 water buckets, pull from the corner that you're standing on. And that way you only need 2 buckets to do the entire farm. Alright, we are back in our farm, and Colin is going to demonstrate in the live coral. So place your 2 water buckets in your corners. pull from your corner, and make the entire first layer an infinite water source, moving all the way around in each corner. With the same 2 water buckets, you are going to place a bucket of water in the corner opposite of our exits. So find your fence gates, and where there are 2 solid blocks on each side, if you're in the farm, this will be even with your head. You're going to place a water bucket in the corner on both sides. And you're going to refill your water buckets. Now you're going to place 2 more buckets of water, but this time you're going to go on the same block on the side of the wall that the leaves are on. You're not going to do this on the outside wall or on the inside wall. Towards your exit, you're going to place your second bucket of water. And he missed. Alright, there we go. Place your final bucket of water on the opposite side towards your fence gates. Alright, with our water now placed in the corners, the pickles are exiting towards the sides where the fence gates are. As you can see though, we still have some source blocks of water where the water is not flowing, and pickles will not exit if they get stuck in this still water. So to get the water flowing, you do the same thing on opposite sides. So you start off where your water block is, and you're going to place down a leaf right next to your center coral. And as you can see, every time you place a leaf, the water is elevated up by 1 block, and we're just going to work towards our exit, placing a leaf down until all the water is completely elevated, and now all the pickles will flow freely out of the farm. Break your leaves, and the water will keep the same position. Alright, once you have an infinite water source on your second farm, you're going to do the exact same thing as before, placing your water bucket in the corners on both sides of the farm. But note that this is going to be a mirror image of the one that we just did, so your buckets of water will always be where these 2 solid blocks are in the corner. And your second bucket of water you're going to do towards your leaf, which will then force the water to flow towards your exit. And you're going to do that on both sides of the farm. And just like before, we are going to place our leaves right up next to our center coral block, and we're going to add them sequentially until all the water is elevated and the pickles will then flow towards your exit. And that's how you do the water. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the lower 2 farms. Now that the water manipulation is done on all 4 farms, I do want to go over one troubleshooting step. If you accidentally misplace the water bucket, like we've done many times, and you're adding your second bucket of water towards your fence gates and you accidentally miss and you hit above your leaf block, you're going to accidentally create an infinite water source where you don't want it. Pickles will get stuck here, so if this happens to you, just grab yourself some building blocks, build out over your infinite water source, and then encase the top coral all the way around. And then anywhere there's an infinite water source, we're just going to place a block of a building block that will then lower that water level. Once your water is back to the first layer only, break your temporary blocks, and that is the easiest way to start over without killing your coral. We have seen people that try to correct that and end up killing their entire farm, so we don't want that happening to you. So if you do accidentally make that infinite water source by misplacing, just know that the only way to get rid of it is to remove it, and you can't remove it with buckets because the infinite water source will just replace itself. So encase that all the way around, break your temporary blocks, and start over with your water manipulation. Alright, now that the farm is complete, we are going to add a sea pickle on top of each of our coral blocks where the source pickle will go. And that is the coral block that is elevated up 1. And we are going to move on to droppers and dispensers. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I am not a fan of temporary blocks. So you don't have to do it this way. You could always place a temporary block even with your pickle. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 1 block over, and I'm going to place a block, which will be a permanent block, build out 1 right next to our sea pickle. And I'm going to do this on all 4 farms, making sure that I am 1 block off center from our pickle. And this can be on any side, as long as you have 1 block gap, like so. Grab your droppers, jump in your farm. It's going to be the easiest way to place it. And you're going to face a dropper towards your sea pickle. Just like that. You're going to place a second dropper. And then you're going to switch to your dispenser, and you're going to crouch down in your farm, facing up, making sure that when you place your dispenser that it is pointing down into your sea pickle. And you're going to do this for all 4 farms. Placing it on that block, and making sure the final dispenser is facing down. Alright, now that we have our droppers and dispensers in place, just confirm that your dispenser is squarely over the pickle. That way you don't have to go in and fix your farm later. Now, to load the bone meal into the dispenser, we are going to use something really unique to this farm, and that is a hopper minecart. Now, traditionally, hoppers can only flow down. There's no way of turning a hopper upside down to send items up. So we're going to explain this in more detail when we get to the crafting system. But for now, just know that our bone meal is going to be loaded from the bottom up. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a hopper on the back of our dropper. And then we're going to place a rail on top of our hopper. Once we add the rail, you are going to take a block of sand and add it on top of your rail. Now the rail is recognized as a full block. As you can see, the sand is floating. Take your hopper minecart, place it on top of the rail, just like so. Once you have your hopper minecart, you're going to crouch so you can see your rail better, and you're going to break that rail. And as you can see, when you break the rail, the hopper minecart stays in the same position, but the rail is no longer there to support that sand block. So that sand will clip through the minecart. You'll take your building block of choice, again mine is glass, and you're just going to go all the way around, encasing it in, making sure that that hopper minecart does not escape. And you're going to do this for all 4 farms. Placing your hopper, crouching, and putting down a rail. If you don't crouch, you will be opening the hopper, so crouch, put down your rail, put a sand block on top, place a hopper minecart, and break the rail. And you're going to do this for all 4 farms. Now, one thing to note, as you saw on the other farms, I was on the side when I placed the rail down. If your rail does not orient itself left to right, if you're standing on the dropper and your minecart is facing a different direction than all of the other hopper minecarts, just note that when you break the rail, the hopper minecart will always orient itself in the same direction. So the placement of the rail and the placement of the hopper minecart does not matter at all. So don't worry about that. Just make sure that you clip that sand through your hopper minecart, encase it so it doesn't escape on you, and you are done with that portion of the wall. Alright, your farm should now look like this with the hopper minecarts sitting nicely above your hopper. Whenever you break the rails, just know that your hopper is going to collect those rails. So if you use the rails that you intend to build with, go ahead and collect those now out of that back dropper and head over to all of your observers. It doesn't matter which one. You do need powered rails or activator rails for this, and they for each row of observers, they have to be the same rail type, so you cannot mix and match by going activator, power. So you have to do all power or all activator on each row of observers. So what I mean by that, just add down your activator rails. If you had powered rails and activator rails, you didn't have enough materials for one or the other, you can mix and match as long as they are the same type of rail on the row of observers, and they don't even need to be all the way along the same side. You can switch. They just can't be different types like this, because they will not transmit a signal all the way through. So powered rails or activator rails, it doesn't matter. Now you will notice that when we place down these blocks, that this center coral is now not in line with the rest of the farm. That is okay. As soon as we turn the farm on, all of the floors will shift back into place, and that is due to the quasi-connectivity that we are using on this lower row of pistons. So as soon as we apply a redstone signal to these rails, your shifting floor will be back in its place. Now that we have our rails, let's go to the top of the farm, grab your observers, and on the middle dropper, we're going to look towards our rail, and conveniently we have a block to place on, but you're wanting to look into the rail, place your block, and you're going to go 3 observers, making sure that the faces are all going towards the rail, and all of the redstone output is going towards your dropper. So I say that because sometimes you get a misplaced block and your observer's facing down. So we do not want that. We want all of our observers facing towards this middle dropper. You're going to do that on both of the upper levels, but on the lower level, you'll notice that if we place up against the rails, we're going to miss our dropper. So what you're going to do is you're going to place it into the observers that are face up, and you're going to place it all the way across, like so. And that's all that is required for your dropper and dispenser. Switch to your building block, add a nice little roof so your pickles don't pop out, because this farm is going to yield a lot of pickles, and we want to collect every single one of them. So just place a roof over any exposed water. These valleys in between our observers and our roof, you don't need blocks unless you just absolutely want them, but you do need a block on either side of your fence gates, keeping in mind that whenever there's a fence gate, you always put a fence gate on top of it. And you're going to do this on both sides of the farm, covering every gap where there is water below it, and making sure that you always place a fence gate with blocks on either side. Alright, now that is layer 1 complete. You do need to start wiring the layers together. So what we are going to do first is we're going to grab our solid block, and we're going to place a solid block in between each of your rails. And this is how we're going to transmit the signal from the upper layers to the lower layers. You're going to need a glass block, and so what I typically do is I go on the inside of the farm and I build up 1. So down here where it is lower, I'm going to build up 2, just to where I've got a block that I can look into. So on the inside of the farm, build up 1 block to where it is above our solid block. Switch to your observer, and you're going to crouch and look up into this corner, making sure that your observer is facing down. And you're going to do this for every farm that is connected, crouching, looking up, placing the observer. So your farm should look like this. Alright, now that we've got our observers ready to power this redstone, we are going to place a door on top of our observers. Now the orientation does not matter and the type of door does not matter. I'm using bamboo, so it is not as loud in the video. I think most farms you see will use the iron door, but any door will do. So place your door, and I always start from the A side. There is no pattern or step that you have to do first, but if you place it from the A side going towards the B side, when you get to the B side, you can confirm that your farm is working if your floor is shifted back into its starting position. Again, it doesn't matter which door you place first, it will correct itself, but that is the way I do it, just to confirm that all of my build is working as intended. Now we are going to start the second layer by placing leaf blocks on top of each dispenser. So Colin is going to place a leaf block on the dispenser. Now make sure that you do not place it on the dropper, you do place it on the dispenser. And unlike the Fr0zone V2, these farms are built exactly vertically of one another. You do not stagger it like we did in our previous video. Once you have your leaves placed, you're going to waterlog all of them. And we are going to move on to placing our pistons. Now, the first piston that I like to place is on the lower farm. And that will make sense here in a moment. So on the lower of the two farms, I'm going to walk up to my rails and I'm going to place a piston down on the rail. And then I'm going to do a row of 5 pistons just like on the first layer. And the reason I do that first is because the elevated farm is going to rest on top of these pistons. So place 5 more facing the inside of your farm. And on the side that it is not connecting to, you are going to just make sure that your piston is in line with your the row that you place in the middle. So a good way to make sure that you're placing it in the right spot is make sure that it is 1 block higher than your leaf blocks. Because if you tried to place it on the rail, you will break your leaf block and you will break your farm. So what I do is I look at my door that I just placed, I crouch, place my first piston, and then I build off of it from there. And moving back to the lower farm, place your pistons on the rails because that is the correct position for our farm. So now your farm should look like this. Alright, that is the pistons laid out for our second layer. So our second layer is starting to take shape. Now, unlike the first farm, we are going to build out the walls before we do the coral to keep all the water contained. You don't have to do this if there's nothing in your base that's going to be destroyed. But what I always do is I go to my lower farm and I build out the first bit of walls right even with my pistons. Keeping in mind that I always put a fence gate on top of a fence gate. And this is, again, true all the way up, or your pickles will get stuck. I'm going to do the same thing in the middle of the farm. You don't have to fill in this gap unless you want to. Just build over from your blocks, placing your fence gate on top of your fence gate. Now, just like the first layer, this outside wall needs to receive a block update to power the pistons. We are going to use our note block once again in the middle of our piston row, so the third piston. We're going to place a note block. And we're going to do this on both outside walls, or both rows on the outside wall. Once you have your note block in place, switch to your solid block. Build out 1 row above your pistons. And the remaining pistons, we are going to add a solid block on top of each of them. And your farm should look like this. Continue building up your wall until you are even with that solid block. Alright, now that is our walls complete. So if you're following along, your farm should look like this. Now we went ahead and did build up even all the way across. Just know that the elevated farm wall will go up one block higher, which we will get to in a moment. But just like the first farm, we are going to build out one block from our solid blocks on the outside wall, just like this. And we're going to do this on all 3 of our walls. Once you have one block above your solid blocks, switch to your observers, jump back in your farm, and place a row of observers, all the way across your solid blocks. And you're going to do this on every wall of your farm. Alright, now that we have our observers on top of our solid blocks, we are going to move to the coral. Before I move to the coral, there is one thing that I have done repeatedly that I don't want you to do, and that is when I'm building out these farms. Sometimes I'm walking along and I fall down this gap where the door is. If you're not in creative, it is kind of annoying to get out of there. It involves breaking or purling, so you can add a block just above your door. It doesn't need to be a solid block, it doesn't need to be a glass block. It just needs to keep you from falling in. So that is totally optional, but I would definitely recommend it. Now let's hop into our farm to do our coral. Now I always start on the elevated side. It doesn't matter which side you want to do this on, but just like before, Colin is going to place down 2 pieces of coral, one on top of each other, and then put water on the second coral. And he's going to do that for all 4 farms. I am going to jump in my farm so I can show you the way I do my coral placement. And that is by simply building the square like I normally would. And then I pick the side that is the outside wall. I place my first coral block in the middle. I place my second coral block towards the B side. Place my third coral block towards the inside, and then I add 1, 2, 3, and 1. And then once you have that, you're going to place your final coral block on the A side touching your piston. And conveniently you have a space to work in, and you can swim right back up to the top. The coral is the exact same placement as the farm below it. That is the way I do it, so I can do the coral placement easier in survival. As long as you're starting off with a square, it doesn't matter. You can also do all of this from on top of the wall, placing your coral in your corners, jumping across, and finishing up the A side with a solid row of 5 coral. 1, 2, 3, and the final one on the A side. Alright, now that we have added our coral to all 4 farms, if you need help with the coral, just refer back to the beginning of the video. It's the exact same placement as before. We're going to hop in here and we're going to add our corners to keep that water contained in the farm so pickles don't escape. Making sure that you leave a 1 block gap on the B side. Now if you add the corners and you leave this gap, you'll know that the water is, note that the water is flowing. And again, this is really handy when placing your leaf blocks on your coral. Since the water is flowing directly under the coral, this will keep your coral alive. You can know this is true because if I place a block that cuts off the water source, the coral doesn't die on me. So grab your leaves, add them in the same positions as the first farm, and we will be right back. Alright, now that we have our leaf blocks, we waterlog them to make sure that we don't kill our coral when we turn the farm on. And just like before, we are going to build up all the way around that leaf block until we have a solid wall. Once you have that built up, you can finish off your outside walls, placing your fence gates on your fence gates, and making a solid wall in the middle and on the outsides. Now the lower farm, again, is going to be level with the solid blocks, and the upper farm is going to be level with your observers. The rest of it is built exactly the same way as Farm 1, so if you need help with the water manipulation, refer to the beginning of the video, and we will be back in a moment. Alright, your farm should now look like this with your water manipulation complete. Finish off your farm the same way we did on the first level by adding your rails on top of your observers all the way across. And just note once again, as you finish the final row, your farm is not going to shift correctly because we are not receiving a redstone signal. But we can confirm that the bottom farm is working because it has shifted back into place, and as we place our rails on the second row, we have actually been moving the bottom row the whole time. So we know that our farm is working. Add your droppers, dispensers, hopper minecart the same way you did the first row, and once we get that done, we will be back to talk about the third row. Alright, that is the second layer complete. We do need to wire it up the same way we did the first layer, or rather, wire the second layer up to the third layer, the same way we wired up the first layer to the second. So, same as before, add your solid blocks in between each of your rails. Build up 2 blocks on the inside of your farm. Grab your observer and face your observer down into your solid block with the face looking at the sky or the top of your base. Grab your doors and add a door on top of each of your observers, and if you did everything correctly, your farm will now be shifted back into its original starting position. The third layer is identical to the second layer, so we will build that out and move on to the crafting system. If you need help on the third layer, just rewind this video and refer to building out layer 2. Alright, that is our third layer completed. There is only one modification that you have to do on layer 3, and that is you leave the top 3 blocks off of the sand. You don't need to put those on just yet. That will play an important role when we build out the crafting system. Just like before, I always place a block here so I don't fall in. You don't need to do that, but it does make it easier to place your solid block. So place your solid block in between each of your rails, because that's what we will use to power the farm. Make sure you have a solid block on all 3 walls. And it's time to move on to the switch that will turn this farm on. So you're going to grab an observer, you're going to build up 1 block, and you're going to face an observer down on the outside wall. This does need to be on the A side. So start with the side of your coral touching your wall. So if you've reversed this for any reason, this is where you do need to start on the A side with your observer facing up and your glass block like so. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing for the other blocks, placing a block on the inside of your farm with an observer facing down into your solid block. Now you're going to place an observer facing away from your farm on the A side on top of the observer. So the face should be facing away from the A side of your farm, and your redstone output should be facing towards the inside of your farm. And you're going to do that for all 3 of your walls. So now your farm should look like this. The next step is going to be adding an observer in front of each wall, each farm that we will be powering, and we can take that block out. Each wall that we're going to be powering from side A. So take an observer, face it away where the redstone input is facing towards the wall, and we're going to do this on both walls that are facing the outside side A. Switch over to your building block of choice and build a wall all the way until you get right in front of the observer. So this wall does need to be level with the observer, so if you have a gap here, build it up. You're going to do the same thing on the lower farm, so we're going to build this out slightly elevated above, right before you get to the observer, and make sure that you have a solid structure below the observer, because we're going to switch to our powered rails, and outside of the primary observer on side A of the outside wall, we're going to run a row of rails right in front of your observer. And we're going to do this on all of your farms. So you can see that on this one I only went down 1 block. Over here I extended it by 2 blocks. As long as your rails receive an output from your primary observer and provide an input for your second observer. We're going to need a trap door. I'm going to use an iron trap door, and I'm going to place it on the topmost portion of the powering side of the observer, just like this. And I'm going to do this on both of my observers. So if you place it down below, it will not work. If you place it from this side, slightly above, it will not work. It does need to be even with the topmost side of your output of your observers. We're going to switch to scaffolding. So, as I stated before, if you are building with scaffolding, it does come in handy, but you do need scaffolding at the very end of it. So you should already have scaffolding in your inventory by the time you get to this point. You're going to jump on top of your observer. You're going to place down 1 scaffold on top of the observer. While standing on the observer, you're going to place a second one. And that will then connect and be resting on top of your trapdoor. You do the same thing on your next set of farms. Jump, place down a scaffold, and place a second scaffold. Now if you shift click while doing this, it's going to build up, so just make sure that you're looking at your scaffolding and just click it once. And that is how we connect the 2 outside walls of our farms. If you build multiple farms and you chain them all together, you would just continue the same pattern with an observer facing down into your solid block, with an observer on top, run a line of rails 1 block shy of the next wall, your bamboo and trapdoor with the observer facing into the bamboo. The way this works, and I'll put a note block here for Colin to click for me, our clock is going to sit right in front of this outside observer. So he is going to click the note block for me, which will provide a block update, and you will be able to see, go ahead, when he clicks it, it provides a very fast block update, which will then cause the farm to pulse and return side B back to side A. And if we look at the front of the farm, go ahead and pulse it again, we can see that that signal travels down by using the door, observer, and solid block. So the door receives a redstone input from the solid blocks above our pistons, which then triggers the observer to put a redstone signal into the solid block, which activates the rails, and that continues all the way down. On the outside of the farm, where we placed our note blocks, we are using quasi-connectivity, which is only available in Java. So Bedrock players, if you're watching this, this will work on DonutSMP because it is a Java server. But if you're trying to build this to test it out in your private, survival, or hardcore, this will not work. But in Java, we need to provide a block update to our pistons. So go ahead and pulse it again. And when these top observers fire, it will activate this redstone component, which in our case is a note block. So the block update that the piston receives, we are transmitting it with a note block. So go ahead and pulse it for me. You can see that the farm fires. If we remove this note block, go ahead and pulse it again, you'll see that this did not fire. If you were to use a copper bulb, like I said at the beginning of the video, go ahead and pulse it. You'll see that it also does the same thing as the note block, which leaves it in an on state. So if you wanted to use any redstone component, so go ahead and pulse it again, you'll see that it will provide the block update, and each of the neighboring pistons will provide a block update, and your farm will shift back and forth. So any redstone component that you have access to, you can use. Just make sure that you have something in that middle piston. CD3 Daddy here from the future. We forgot to explain the importance of the scaffolding. When you turn your farm on, and this is going to be a little loud, when you turn the farm on, every time the trapdoor drops, the scaffolding actually changes state. When it is off, or the trapdoor is up, the scaffolding is resting on the trapdoor. When the observer provides a redstone signal to the trapdoor drops, which makes the scaffold attach to the one on top of the observer. Now, the observer that is looking into the scaffolding detects that change and then repeats the signal, and it happens again and again. The reason that you don't want to observe the trapdoor or have this observer elevated up one, observing the trapdoor, is the scaffold doesn't take a full redstone tick, so the signal is transmitted faster. If you tried to modify this by removing the scaffolding or try to wire this up in any other way using standard redstone components, the redstone tick will be too slow and your farm will shift back and forth. It will look like it's working, but your dispenser will be firing at the moment that the floor is shifting, and you will be burning bone meal, and your farm will probably not be running at all. So just note that this is an important step in building your farm. So back to the tutorial. Alright, now that we have all 3 layers complete and we have our redstone circuit completed, we still need to build the clock, which we will get to in a moment. But we are going to build an integrated crafter so you can easily load your farm with bone meal. The crafter is essential because we are going to store bones, and the bones will save space in the long run because 1 bone is 3 bone meal. So to convert it into bone meal, we are going to start underneath the column with the hoppers, and we are going to go 1 block below the hopper and then 1 block below that, and we're going to place a piece of soul sand on the outside wall. So the soul sand is going to be 1 block below our hopper. Take some packed ice. This can be blue ice. It cannot be ice unless you are in a frozen biome or it will melt. So packed ice is the easiest to come by. So build out 2 blocks from your soul sand. And you're going to build away from your fence gates. And you're going to do the same thing on both sides, building out away from your fence gates. So depending on the orientation that you chose for your farm, you could be building it exactly the same, or you could be building it a mirror image. Once you have your soul sand and packed ice, we're going to build a little barrier all the way around, right until we get to the packed ice, And instead of placing a block behind the packed ice, we're going to go below it. And then we are going to add a stair facing into our bubble column, which is what the soul sand will be. And we'll put a building block on the outside of that. Now this can be any building block of choice, but again, I like glass because I like to see all the components working. Take your glass or building block of choice, and one over from our first staircase, we're going to place a block, and we're going to put a second staircase facing in. Go ahead and encase both of your stairs with your building blocks, making sure that no water escapes, because we are going to waterlog these staircases like so. Once you have your staircases waterlogged, we can then grab a leaf block, and right next to the water stream coming from your top staircase, we're going to place a leaf block, which will be to the right of your hopper minecart and sand. Go ahead and waterlog your leaf block as well. Switch to a sign, and we are going to add a sign directly above the packed ice by your soul sand. And then we are going to go up diagonally from there in between the two staircases and place another sign. Now this can be fence gates if you have a surplus of fence gates at this point. If you place a fence gate down, it does need to be in the open position, because pickles, and in this case bone meals, will stop when the fence gate is closed, but they will pass through when the fence gate is open, just like a player does. Now, to keep the water contained in the farm, if you don't want this to happen while building it, make sure you've got an extra block up top. And now we have our water stream that is pointing bone meal into our bubble column. Now, a special note, if you see that this water stream is facing this back corner. So if this leaf, let me replace that real quick. If you notice that the leaf, by waterlogging it, redirects the water into this back corner, and so go ahead and waterlog it again. With a waterlogged leaf, it does direct it away from the leaf, and since we have water coming from the staircase, it'll push the bone meal into this corner, which gives it more time to align when it reaches the bottom staircase. And when it reaches the bottom staircase, it will then flow along the wall, and it will reach our bubble column, hugging the wall, and every time it passes a hopper minecart, that bone meal will be picked up on its way up to the very top of your farm. So it's just a very clever and a very cool way to get your bone meal loaded from the bottom up. Now that we have our water stream, before we block everything off, you are going to need a crafter. So grab a crafter from your inventory, hop in, and directly above the staircase, one block above our water stream, we're going to place our crafter facing down. So what that looks like from the outside, it's going to be one block above your staircase and one block above your waterlogged leaf. Go ahead and grab your building block of choice and start building your walls for your bubble column, and we're going to go all the way till we're even with our sand. And we're going to do the same thing directly above our leaf, all the way up. When we get to the top, you're going to take another stair and place it on the back wall facing your farm. Build up a block all the way around it, because we are going to waterlog this as well. Place your water, and watch your water flow down to your soul sand. At this point, we are going to grab a cactus of all things and place it on top of the sand. Now what this cactus will do, if bone meal were to make it all the way past all three hoppers, we don't want those entities to despawn naturally, because we are producing a ton of pickles, and so we don't want to deal with lag or entity limit issues. So this will destroy the bone meal, but this is just a precaution. We are going to build a circuit that will implement overflow protection, which we will get to in a moment. On the back of your stair, place your building block of choice all the way over your cactus. The only one that is actually required is this middle block, or your bone meal will be shooting out of your bubbles column. The one above the cactus, if you didn't add anything here, this cactus will just grow, and so this just keeps that from happening. So place your blocks on top, and we are going to be pretty much done with that. Once you have that in place, you can either take your buckets of water all the way up, or if you refer to video 2, where we talk about bubble columns in depth, you can use kelp to turn all of that flowing water into source water blocks, which will then convert this into a bubble column. So if your bubble column is not working, that means you missed a source block somewhere here, so refer to video 2 for more information. Alright, now that we have our water stream and our crafter, we need to wire it up into our farm. So the first thing we're going to do is focus on the overflow protection. Grab yourself a solid block, jump on the top of your farm, and right next to your hopper you're going to break out this block if it is glass, because we cannot use glass for most redstone applications. Make sure that your hopper is visible and place a solid block. Turn face away from your solid block and grab a comparator, place it down where the comparator is reading the hopper signal through the solid block. We are going to need some redstone blocks and redstone dust. The redstone block is going to be placed directly next to your comparator, like so. This is the most compact way of doing it, and it is only 9 pieces of redstone dust. There is other ways of feeding a redstone signal into this, but this is the most compact and easiest to accomplish. What this redstone block is doing, when that hopper gets to a comparator level of 15, which is completely full, this will then transmit a redstone signal out of the comparator. And we are going to transmit that signal into a solid block. So when that hopper fills up, the comparator will turn on and power this block. Directly below the block, if you were building with glass, we do need to break this one out, as well as the one below that. Replace the bottom piece of glass with a solid block and put a piece of redstone dust on top. The reason this bottom one needs to be a solid block is because we are now going to build out 2 blocks below your redstone dust and place 2 more pieces of redstone dust. Redstone cannot travel down transparent blocks in Java, so this does need to be a solid block or your overflow protection will not work. The comparator powers this solid block. The solid block powers the redstone signal, or the redstone line, and the redstone line will then power a piston, which you will place directly underneath your glass block. Now, I just said that glass blocks does not work with redstone in most applications. This is one of those applications where you could use a solid block, but because of quasi-connectivity, we are able to power this piston just fine using glass. Switch back to your solid blocks, and underneath your sticky piston, place a solid block. And that is your overflow protection circuit complete. Now to power our crafter, it is quite simple. We are going to go off of the piston line, which is powered by observers and either activator rails or powered rails. Into your powered rail, we're going to place an observer facing into our solid block. This powered rail will fire once, but we want this crafter to fire twice. So what we're going to do is on the inside, directly above your crafter, we're going to hop down and we're going to place an observer facing up. We are going to place a second observer, but we are going to be looking into the observer we just placed. And from here, we're going to hop down. And if you want to, you can break this out so you don't have to worry about building up. And we're going to place an observer facing down. So your observer should look like this. Two observers facing down diagonally from each other with the top right, or if you're mirrored, top left observer looking at the first. Grab your powered rails or activator rails and place a line directly into your solid block. What this is going to do is give us a double pulse. So every time, in this case it's side A, every time side A fires, the first observer will detect it, power your crafter. Your second and third observer will then fire shortly after, powering the crafter again, and you will get a double pulse every time side A fires. To transmit the signal from our observers, we do need 2 more solid blocks. Before we do that, open up your crafter and make sure that you have all but 1 boxes checked. It can be any of the boxes, it doesn't have to be the middle. I just prefer the middle. Place your solid block below your observers, and your crafting system is done. We have our overflow protection, which is reading the top hopper, which will fill up last in our farm. And once it fills up completely, the sticky piston will move the solid block out of the way, meaning that the rail does not receive power and your crafter doesn't craft bone meal to be destroyed by our cactus. This is one of the coolest crafting systems I have ever seen, so another major shout out to 3706 for designing this. We are thoroughly impressed. On the opposite side of the farm, there are 2 slight modifications that you will need to do. If you have your fence gates on the same side, you would build it in the same direction as the first. However, we opted to go mirror image to keep our pickles, the pickle exit close to each other for our water stream. But that is totally up to you. Build your platform just like you did before with your staircase. And we're going to just do this rather quickly so we can get to the next portion of the video. If you have any questions, please join our Discord. We'd be happy to troubleshoot with you. And if you have any ideas, we would love to hear them. So let us get this built out, and we will show you the slight variations between the 2 sides. Alright, now we have our second crafter built out. You can see it is an exact mirror image of the other. The only variation that I want you to be aware of, on the elevated side of the farm, our observer is looking into our rail. Just like our shifting floor, where the farm is slightly below, the observers look into the observer. You have to do the same thing with the crafter. The observer will look into the observer on the lower side, and on the elevated side, the observer will look into your rails. So that is the only difference between the elevated version and the lower version. Your overflow protection still looks at your hopper. Everything else is built exactly the same. The soul sand is 1 block below. That is the only difference. Now, we need to add storage, because what good is a crafter if we do not have bones to craft from? So we are going to grab some chests and some hoppers. The first hopper we're going to do is face directly into that crafter. You're going to take your chest and you're going to put it on top of your hopper and make it a double chest. And then you're going to build up diagonally all the way up, and as I do this side, Colin will do that side. Again, it is a mirror image of each other. The double chest starts next to your column, and you just zigzag it all the way up from there. Alright, now the double chests again are zigzagged, with the centermost row being where they overlap. And as you can see, to connect it, all you do is place a hopper underneath your chest into the chest below it. And you can do this as you're building it out. I just wanted it for visual reference to show the pattern that you're going to follow. And once you get to the very top chest, you are done. And you can run hopper line to the top chest, water stream, however you want to get bones into it. It doesn't matter. That part is completely up to you. But this is the integrated crafting system and integrated bone storage for your farm. You would do the same thing on all sides of the farm. So this side we would build out with our soul sand, 1 block down with our packed ice going away from the fence gates, and it is built identically. So just rewind this video and build up your crafting system. Alright, and we have built out our crafting system for all 4 of our towers. This is a 4 module tower, so each tower has 3 modules, and we have built 4 side by side. So each crafter will control the 3 towers. Let's hook it all up. Simple, easy comparator clock. If you need help with a comparator clock, slow this video down and watch what I am placing here, or you can refer to video 2, which we go in detail on how a comparator clock works. The only thing you need to note on this comparator clock is your repeaters need to be set to a total of 4 redstone ticks, so 2, 2. Alright, we've got our clock in place. Let's go ahead and turn it on just so you can see that bone meal working. And just like that, our farm is running. And you can see it aligns perfectly, being picked up by our hoppers. And we are not burning anything by our cactus. All 4 of our farms should be running just fine. And you can see that our water is aligning up in the corner just like we wanted. And that is it. Thank you so much for watching another one of our Pickle Farm tutorial videos. I am CD3 Daddy.
And I'm C3DG Minecraft.
We have a lot of fun building these. We do invite you once again to join our Discord. We will have the schematics for this farm as well as the other farms, and we want to provide a place for you to be able to ask questions and get help when building your pickle farms. If you've already built pickle farms, take a picture and drop it in our Discord. We would love to see your crazy designs. Once again, as always, we have loaded up the farm behind us so you can see it running. And we will catch you on the next video.